Alright, moving on to the third and probably second to last review of some of the projects in the Indie Charity Bundle for accessibility in tabletop RPGs. We are looking at the mini campaigns and one-shots this time around. And what's interesting here is we've got three categories. I think this is the biggest section, yeah, the biggest section of projects. We have all of these. Oh, there we go. All of these, and actually, okay, yeah, it's not quite as big as I thought it was a second ago, but it is still the biggest category. We have all of these, which are, never mind, all of these, which are sort of generally, mini campaigns and one-shots that are a little more open-ended for GMs to create sort of their own adventures within a set of specific mechanics or setting. Like, not just the GM. This one is kind of a collaborative storytelling game, but these ones are for a more open-ended prep base. It's hard to, because they are kind of different from each other. Like, Pillars in particular is pretty unique in terms of format, but it's not, while being mini campaigns and one shots, they're not really set campaigns. They're, systems, not systems for playing out full campaigns generally, but systems for which you can design your own campaign, your own set of sessions, potentially put together with your players based on a consistent set of mechanics and setting, and generally a lot simpler than the, non-simple full systems, because they're just designed for a little mini campaign or a one-shot. But you've got those, and those kind of generally fit together. Then these ones, which are differentiated by having a specific dice rolling mechanic where the way you roll the dice matters, not just the number that comes up, and we'll get into that when we get to those. And finally, this subcategory, and this is like the traditional module, so to speak, or set adventures, where, everything is specifically laid out, and in theory, at least, you could, without even having read them before, just run them on the spot as a GM with your players. Now, obviously, ideally, you would have read it through first, but what I'm trying to say is it's a set campaign or session versus these ones, which are something for you to design your own mini campaign or sessions based on a framework. Yeah, and I didn't highlight this one because this one is just sort of a draft version of this. So, like I said, most people not going to want to look at this one honestly, but if you like this and you're interested in how sort of games change as they develop, or modules change as they developed, whether you're trying to remember the word, whether you're someone who actually designs games or you just are interested in seeing how people do, then maybe looking at both of these would be fun. But basically, you'd probably never look at this alone. I actually probably won't bother opening it up when we finally get that far down. I probably won't review that one, because it's just a draft version of this. Alright, up to the top. Let's start with Pillars What Remains. Okay. It's a tabletop role-playing game of identity and endurance. It has cover art, but I don't think it has art otherwise. Layout, it's kind of well developed. Like, you've got the pullouts, you've got a bunch of headings, so it's not like it's unpolished in terms of visuals fully. It's just it doesn't have art at present. This is one of the more work in progressy games that we have on the list. And it's hard to sort of know how exactly I want to go over this, because this is one of the ones that's so radically different than, most RPGs. You could consider the whole thing a highlight in a sense. But I'll try to just summarize looking at the table of contents, I think. So basically, the players collectively play one character, and they are each a sort of pillar of that character's identity. I believe there's a GM, but I can't quite remember. Hopefully I'll figure that out as I go on. But the players all play aspects of one character, who is a courier, uh, delivering letters from across settlements in a post-apocalyptic magical wasteland. Okay, the rules. Starting out, a player will sort of create a memory, and everybody joins in playing this memory as a group, and they sort of build it out as a group. Counters and conflicts are sort of the more traditional. That's more, similar to what you would do in a typical RPG. It's still not all that typical because it's all players trying to, solve the problem through the same character. I can't quite remember how that works, but I don't think we're really going to go over that one in detail. This one, it's a little more complicated. Okay, echoes. I somehow passed over that. Echoes are something that happen if you run out of a certain resource, I believe, at which point a memory becomes distorted and players play through a distorted version of one of the previously encountered memories. And depending on how they resolve that, there can be different effects on the ending. Then you get to the hollow and the persona, which is kind of the end game. And if I remember it, this might not happen, if you don't encounter any echoes, but sort of an amalgamation of all the distorted memories appears in physical reality, and the players have to try and overcome that as the character versus their alter ego. There's also world stuff, but what we're going to stick to looking at, I think, is memories and the hollow and echoes, maybe getting to the hollow and the persona. So, starting out on page 6. Yeah, memories. One player setting the context and interaction of the scene related to defining aspect of their pillar. So basically, the first player, let's just call them, is representative of one of the aspects of the player character, and they create a memory, or the start of a memory, related to that aspect. And then the GM and other players, so there's definitely a GM, I thought so, contribute to those scenes by role-playing NPCs or other contributions. And it sort of just helps you build out the character and might become distorted if echoes occur. So this sort of shows how it would go. Courier encounters some sort of thing in the waste. GM asks who wants to make a memory. Someone decides to, and they set the scene. Another player picks in as the NPC that was established. And then the player who is playing the memory version of the character in this moment, decides what to do off of that. The GM steps in and does something else. And it keeps going back, sort of popcorning from the other players to the player that started the memory, who is deciding what the character did in that memory. So it's something that would probably be hard for completely inexperienced role players, but could definitely be a lot of fun. Yeah, and it's intended to be more or less free-form role-playing. So, the one person will sort of start a scene, and the other person entirely, changes the context of that scene by adding that storm element. So it's all very collaborative. The person starting it doesn't necessarily know what direction the memory is going to go in at all. Encounters and conflicts, we're just going to skip that one because that's a little more typical. Still very different than most of what you would see in RPGs, but a bit more difficult. Okay, let me see. So, the echo happens. Yeah, I didn't quite remember how this worked. Happens during a conflict, it looks like, and only applies to the one player who sort of filled out the stat, which triggers it. Yeah, so it's the memory, right? Child trapped on the rubble who's the sibling. Yeah, this happened in the memory as well, but you were able the player character was able to, the collective player character was able to save that sister in the memory. And so the waste is trying to change it into a memory of failure, where the sister presumably does not survive. So the player tries to resolve the situation like a normal conflict. And that failure, or the prospective failure, is playing out in the memory in a way that appears supernatural, not just, a standard failure. Yeah, the rest of play continues of the conflict as this goes on. And if failure occurs completely, the memory will become broken and the drive that is linked to it will be inverted, causing problems and affecting the endgame. Right, after completing the third encounter, they are faced with the Hollow, which is constructed from broken memories. And the GM will imagine a creature that is sculpted from broken memories. The strength and size is proportional to the number of broken memories. And the players work together to create a persona to represent something made out of the memories. So it's kind of like two avatars versus each other, one made out of the GM based on broken memories, one made by the players out of non-broken ones. And then it's made out of several conflicts. And they have to figure out the difficulty. Okay, I was just trying to see if it really describes what the conflicts are, whether they're based on memories or not, or just the avatar, but I don't think it goes into that much detail. So as you can see, this is a very unique game. I think there, as you are playing, there are definitely going to be questions where you have to figure out how best to proceed in ways the text of the game itself does not cover. But I think it's very workable and also incredibly interesting. And I think a lot of the examples of play really demonstrate how you might do things and how it might work. And I'd encourage you to check it out if a sort of more experimental game where all the players are controlling one character and building out the memory and personality of that character together over time, and it can get distorted into sort of an alter ego that can replace the player if it defeats them. It's all very experimental, and as a result, some of it might not work out perfectly as written, but it also, due to the experimental nature for me, is, interesting, exciting, something that I'd definitely be willing to play, and I think, it's worth checking out. Alright, next up on the list of mid to one-shots, mid-sized campaigns to one-shots is Not Today Wasteland. I think the writing in this one is quite good in terms of just explaining what the game is and providing interesting hooks for you to grab onto without really being overly verbose or getting in the way. So I'm just going to read out the beginning paragraph, and I think that pretty much gives you the gist of the game. You are a mutant trying to survive in the wasteland. Everything out here is dangerous. Every living thing is as desperate as you are and trying to survive as best as they can, possibly by eating you. Everything is radioactive: soil, water, air, and the few creatures and plants left. Your DNA is unstable, and new mutation is constantly around the corner. Your life expectancy is low, but if you can make use of your new skills, maybe you can survive another day. When you were still living in the underground bunker, before they kicked you out, there were rumors that somewhere in the wasteland there was a place called the Oracle of Kaiga, with drinking water and fertile soil. Everyone talked about it, but no one had the guts to risk their necks venturing out to find it. You never believed it, but now it might be the only salvation, if it really exists. I also think the character creation is relatively good. Like, I already went over the stats, but you start with a free mutation of one of those. And then you also get a random mutation on the 1d100 table, which I think is really the bulk of the system. You get a goal, a name, and then collectively you figure out what bunker you guys were in and why you were kicked out. Yeah, I believe it establishes that the Oracle of Kaiga probably isn't real early on here, but it goes into detail later on possible options for what it can be. I'm not going to spoil those, so if you want to find them out, then you can look yourself, I think. It's a nice surprise, so I don't want to, sort of expose all the mystery of the game right here and now. Like, if if you want to play this game as a player instead of as a GM, say, I don't want to, just tell you all the possible quote-unquote endings. Anyway, some flavor text basically about how, time didn't exist inside the bunker. You only heard rumors of the seasons. Like I said, I think all the writing, at the very least, gets the job done. It's not the kind of game writing where it tries to be written like a book or like a story, so I can't necessarily say it's like beautiful writing or something, but it's very effective and excites the imagination, which is what you really want for a RPG book, I feel. And there's a lot of tips for the GM. I'm going to look at this because there are different options for the ending too. The Oracle Caiga, the legends speak of as a still functioning Geiger counter. It ticks relentlessly at the center of a green and lush but highly radioactive area. The entire zone is dotted with vegetation-covered ruins, which on closer inspection turn out to be wreckage from a spaceship. Upon the outbreak of the catastrophe that damaged Earth, the spaceship was supposed to carry a handful of privileged humans in search of another habitable planet, but it crashed, killing the passengers. Some of the first bunker dwellers had discovered the area during an expedition, and on returning had described it to the others, only to die shortly thereafter from radiation sickness. Over time, the tale has been warped and turned into a myth. Yeah, so there are other options for the ending, but they're all kind of grim. It's generally not. Everything is fine, and it's just a normal, lush radioactive area. A non-radioactive area. Yeah, the tables below are intended to help you, sort of build out the world, but it's all very free form on how you can play it. Like the bulk of what you'll figure out of what is provided for you really is the mutations table. So if they're incompatible, one replaces the other. You can lose stats from it, but not to the point of reaching 0. And let's try and find an interesting mutation to look at. Cesspit sounds kind of interesting. You can eat and digest anything, even inorganic. You're immune to food poisoning and hardly responsive to alcohol, drugs, and medicines. So, some benefits and some disadvantage there. Nosferatu, you have 2 huge sharp incisors and can only feed on human blood. -1 to stats during the day and +1 at night. Doppelganger. One day you can make a nerves roll on a success. You secrete a naked copy of yourself that you control for 5 minutes, after which it liquefies. In case of extreme failure, you have no control over the copy, which does not liquefy and wants to replace you at any cost. And then there are other ones that are more simple and just affect your stats pretty much. Your mass doubles, but not your volume. +2 to melee, lifting weights, and physical endurance. -3 to jumping, climbing, and swimming. -1 to stealth. Your complexion is leaden. So I think there's a lot of fun mutations there. There's encounters that you can find, which a lot of them are quite fun. Let's see. A valley of flesh, hair, and sinew, dotted with eyes and jaws and spinning eyes, and some of these are inspired by various forms of media. Slimy, branching caverns turn out to be something's digestive system. Various tribes of people. So there are fun encounters, some of them more directly monsters, some of them, groups of people or things that can happen. Then there's events, which are sort of more environmental effects. This last one in particular, I don't know if I would include this one because it kind of guarantees only one person will survive, but it's fairly interesting. At least, rather, I wouldn't include it as something you would just roll on a 12 out of 2d6. Yeah, the last thing I suppose I'll point out is on a lot of these things you see a lot of -1 to muscles, but not a lot of -1 to nerve, so just note that if you're running this, you'll probably have to find some of the opportunities to reduce nerve for yourself, because that's also a way characters can die, and if you only ever reduce muscles, then that kind of obviously biases that stat to the one that should be higher. So just food for thought there. And then there is the possible alternate endings of the Oracle. I think that kind of goes over the gist of Not Today Wasteland. I like the art, I like the concept, the random mutation table and the writing are all quite fun. You'll have to fill out some of the stuff yourself. It doesn't provide a campaign for you, it's just sort of a framework for creating one or a setting. And that's what a lot of the projects in this section are going to be like. I'm just gonna scroll down quickly to get to more of the art, because I think these pictures are also nice. So yeah, if any of that sounds good to you, definitely check it out. It's got a sort of dark comedy vibe to it, post-apocalyptic wasteland with mutations and exploration and random encounters and mutations and stuff. Definitely check it out. Alright, I'm trying to speed these up a little. I've made sure to actually read through the PDF first before starting this because it's short this time. So that should help. This game is actually by the same person as the last game as Not Today Wasteland. It's a much more self-contained thing, I feel. Something you're probably going to be doing for one-shots most of the time. Basically, you are some kind of criminal who is past their prime, and you are offered the chance at a new huge heist, which you half reluctantly agree to. There are some things that can help you sort of build out your character, these vices here. There are some things that can help the GM build out what the heists are going to be like, or the challenges. There are these problems that they can add. There are these, theme ideas for the heist itself, and it's all more than just stealing, from a random bank or something. It's all big stuff with ramifications that, sort of have moral questions attached to them. A variety of locations in this sort of derelict city that is also past its prime. Moving on to the game itself, there aren't any character-specific mechanics. Everybody starts with 3 tokens and 4 cards. You get a weapon too, so I guess there is a little bit of difference between the players other than their backstory and personality. Yeah, and there's a token pool at the center, but everybody also starts with 3. And for checks, either against the GM or against another player, basically you pick a card and each card beats other cards. So it's sort of, it's, you play through cards to fit the theme of the game of being sort of a past your prime criminal who's trying to fake it till they make it again. But it's really more rock, paper, scissors mechanically than something like poker. Each card beats certain other cards, and you always have, barring certain circumstances, you always have every card as an option. So the only element of chance is what your opponent chooses to use. You also can't bet tokens, it's just whoever wins the challenge gets a token from the other person. And 4 beats a 3 and a 2, 3 beats a 2 and a 1, 2 beats a 1, and 1 beats a 4. That sort of sets up this interesting situation where 4 and 3 seem sort of better. You could argue that 4 is the best because it beats the other thing, which beats 2. Like 4 beats 2 options, and one of those options is another attractive card in that option also beats 2. However, if you tie on a 3 or a 4, so say both players pick a 4 because they think it's the best option, then both of them lose a token instead. And if they can't lose a token, they lose a whole card. And if you run out of cards, you're dead. You can regain a card, but, that's instead of regaining a token, so it's still kind of restricting. And then, whereas if you tie on a 2 or a 1, which are theoretically the quote-unquote less good options, because they only beat one card, if you tie on one of those, just want to make sure I can find this. Yes, if you tie on those, all that happens is the challenge repeats. So there's a risk-reward where 3 and 4 kind of seem better at face value. Maybe 4 is generally the best. However, 2 and 1 are less risky in terms of what happens if you tie. And then 1 beats 4, so there's a lot of... Like I said, it's sort of more like rock, paper, scissors than a traditional card game. However, it's complex rock, paper, scissors. It's not just A beats B, beats C, beats A. It's, some options beat more than others, but are worse on a tie. So it's got a lot of complexity there that makes the choice not obvious. And maybe lets you sort of bluff a little or try to signal what one you think you're going to do, so it's not just guesswork, but it's hard to say for certain. The other main mechanic and thing you use tokens for is after that challenge, anyone can spend a token to modify the result. So if you if you punch another player, that's one of the examples they gave. Obviously, the characters punching each other, not the players straight punching each other. The character that wins, the character that loses and gets punched can spend a token and say, but it doesn't hurt. And then the character who won the punch can say, I don't know if it necessarily has to be an and or a but for positive. Okay, so but is supposed to be uh but is supposed to be a downside for victories and a benefit for failures. However, I don't know if that applies to adding a but to the thing that happened. Like you punch your opponent, but it doesn't hurt them. At that point, if you were the player that did the punch, would you do an and or a but? Would you do and it distracts them for a minute and they fall over? Or would you do but it distracts them in a minute and they fall over? Because at that point, is the but applying to the addition of the initial statement? That's not something that really matters, because I think, this is supposed to just be guidance on how to use it. It doesn't really matter whether you select and or but it's just something worth noting that I don't know if there wasn't a mechanic specifically attached to ands and buts which you would use when there's already been a modification. It can also be a third character entirely who's not involved that modifies the result, or it can be the victor initially, like the person who punched can say, I punched them and all their teeth get knocked out by spending the token they just gained. So that's sort of the gist of the system. It's sort of complex rock, paper, and scissors, where you can gain tokens and spend additional ones to modify the results of any check however you want. So it's all about spending tokens and that effect, and gaining and losing them, potentially losing cards, what card you pick, and the ability to bluff, and that's all happening where characters are potentially betraying each other or just working together to achieve the results of the heist, which, if it did succeed, would probably be kind of a bad thing overall. So it's an interesting setup for a one-shot, which I definitely think is what it's more intended for than mini campaigns. So, if you like cards, if you like sort of classic heists, though, the visuals make it seem like it's a more old-timey, to an extent, setting than completely modern times, but it can be any time you want it to. So if any of that sounds good to you, the potential bluffing, the guessing what your opponent is more likely to use, spending tokens to modify any results so you decide whether to save them up or just use them as soon as you get them, a lot of fun little intricacies like that, all with a morally gray character, then definitely check this one out. Next up, we're looking at the Fish Heist. It is a game where you're a group of penguins trying to steal fish for your penguin colony at the order of sort of the penguin leader. It's a bit of a longer one compared to some of the other ones we looked at, so I'm just going to explore the text instead of having a real summary plan as I've had for some of the shorter ones. And just going over what you need. And first off, you get into the penguin types. Yeah, and you have 3 options, and they have one set skill and another skill of your choice. Then, moving on, there's the heist specialties. Yeah, and it also gives you your skills. So if you double up in a skill, though, say, the sneak is skilled in stealth and sliding, and you pick the little penguin that is also skilled in sliding, then I believe how the skills works is the size of die increases, and I believe it increases twice if you have a skill twice. So that's worth noting. The redundancy is accounted for here. There are a variety of penguin-related skills. You can weaponize your cuteness. You can cause distractions. You can dive. Toss pebbles, screech, and slide. So there's a array of penguin-appropriate skills. Yeah, if you're not applying anything, you roll a d6. If you've got one skill, roll a d8. If you've got both, roll a d10. And there's a relatively set DCs, I believe. Oops. Hopefully I can get rid of that. Yeah, and then items give you effectively advantage. Yeah, and there are negative modifiers, but that is just downgrading the roll. It doesn't change the number that you're targeting effectively. There's possibility for injuries and recovery. Yeah, there's no death, I'm pretty sure, but you may become captured. And the preparation phase, which is, we've sort of gone over the gist of the gameplay. This is where the game, what you do in the game actually starts. You get basically one action to do something to prepare for the heist and get information most of the time, or sometimes get an actual effect like getting gear or recruiting an ally. There's also a shop you can buy things from, if I'm right. And there's the heist phase. There's a suspicion meter. And once, that gets up high enough, at the very least, the heist fails. There are ways to reduce this suspicion. I can't quite remember if difficulty increases as the suspicion meter does, or it's more like a health bar. It says the more tension builds, but it doesn't really say whether that makes things more difficult. I believe it says later on. Yeah, you can do various things to level up. This is sort of the setting. For this one, I'm sort of just going over everything because I don't know that there's a specific highlight other than the concept of being, stealing penguin? Well, actually, I think I can think of a few. I think it's just good to sort of give you an overview of the game first. There are various locations. And now this is the penguin village. And this is really who you're stealing the food for. There's sort of a conservation angle for this game, where, the main conflict is that your village needs food, and that is not explicitly stated to be because of, the effects of human society affecting the food pool, but it's kind of implied. There are other things that sort of allude to that as well. And then here is the stash shop. You can buy equipment before the heist, so I would assume this is sort of part of the preparation phase. Some information on the NPC storekeeper, and various items that the penguins can buy. Quite a list. Yeah, there's a very simple carry system. And, tiny items do not take up a slot, which makes sense. It also makes sense that penguins can, in fact, not carry that much. It's not like they have clothes to put things in. A variety of descriptions of fish and how much they sell for. Some info on other animal species. Description of the environment and why penguins and conservation matters, which I think is definitely part of the highlights. And this goes into sort of all of the Maori influences on the game and everything that's why there is sort of that cultural influence there throughout, which I do think is very much one of the highlights of the game. The idea that all things are linked, the fish belong to the sea belongs to the land holds memory, nothing is truly separate, and actions always have an echo. There's a sense of presence and weight and danger in others. Sort of, I think that also fits into the whole conservation theme as well. And then they have an example heist, which talks about sort of all the areas and the people that are in the areas and shows how sort of simply you can construct everything for a heist. So it tells you some of the things you can do in planning, some of the information you can gather, where customers are and aren't. So I would guess you're not necessarily supposed to increase the sort of level of threat that is present as the... So it's definitely more about the meter filling completely. If it does, the heist is over and fails, than it is about not increasing it in general. But I think that more or less covers it, right? You've got sort of a light-hearted, playful penguin heist RPG with a lot of Maori influence in terms of the names and things and the entire concept, and sort of a conservation message as well. This place takes place in New Zealand. Yes, I am, again, not going to try to pronounce these, but it really tries to highlight a lot of the culture of the area. Yeah, I don't know if it's directly produced by people of that background, but it is clearly made partially as a tribute to it. But it's a relatively small-scale heist game where there's a brief preparation phase and then a sort of more free-form heist phase with a limited series of rooms and groups of people throughout the rooms, and your penguin's just trying to steal fish. There's suspicion, skills, leveling up. It's all very workable. I think it's more designed for one-shots. And I think, like, the main highlight is going to be just the concept of playing as penguins trying to steal fish, and then sort of the uh, allusions to Maori culture and sort of the conservation and environmental undertones of the whole thing, I think, are really points of interest. Here we have H is for Helmo. This is another one I kind of feel like you're going to know whether or not you're interested just based off the basic concept, or even just the title in this case. This is the letter to Mr. Rogers. Because the plot of this game is there is a town, not quite called Sesame Street, but I guess Sesame Hill, where it has been taken by these sort of fuzzy interdimensional monsters that showed up one day, and all the citizens have been captured, but some of them have escaped. And Helmo has sent a letter to a Mr. Rogers that he needs more people in his town. And so Mr. Rogers recruits you to sort of masquerade as the help sent to Helmo, but really to save the captive villagers. Because I like the crayon style here, it's very on theme. Gordon and Maria are the missing villagers. Or neighbors, I suppose. And so, it's supposed to be designed to sort of be episodic, where every session you have a friend or one of the, Sesame Street analog characters show up and have a task for the players that they can choose to accomplish or choose to sort of thwart and oppose that particular quote unquote monster. And they, can collect information about how to defeat Helmo or where the missing neighborhood people might be. And then you choose a letter and a number of the day. A basic format of an episode. They enter the hill, greeted by a monster. There's a problem to solve. They solve the problem or oppose the monster. And they might discover secrets or clues. So basically what I said. And you can combine the monster, the location problem, neighbors, and the letter of the day tables to build an encounter. And the number can also help, and helps for the Countess's council as well, which is one of the more built-out areas. Yep, and then just some sort of basic info on what this framework is compatible with. So you've got the letter of the day table here, which I think is a very nice touch. And when you decide the letter and the number, you can sort of pull from all the monsters and other things that you might find there. There's a list of some of the monsters. A list of the captive neighbors with some basic personality traits. I'm not sure if they have the escaped ones here. Is Gordon there? Yes. Gordon, I believe, has escaped. Here's some of the secrets and clues. Gordon and Maria have escaped. Helmo's weakness is being tickled. A lot of sort of on-theme secrets and clues that your players can discover as they try to solve the episode's problem or thwart the episode's monster that will help them in the overall campaign. Some locations, the under trash, which I think is a very funny concept. The list of encounters. And there's a trash heap that's a entrance to it. Let me see what they say about the Grouchy analog, or whatever it is. Oscar the Grouch analog, if there's one. That's the NPCs. Yeah, it doesn't really say that the Grump is associated with the Undertrash, but I would assume they are. Yeah, maybe that's somewhere in Secrets. And then the Countess's Castle is like the most in-depth full area, where there's a sort of number-associated challenges, one ring circus, 2 adjacent towers, and then they each have their own associated challenges. One of them is just escape the room, so it's not all beat so-and-so. And then here's sort of the problem table. So, you can probably get the gist of it at this point. It is a sort of Sesame Street parody where you're trying to save the captive inhabitants of Sesame Hill from Helmo, who has been brought there from another dimension. And you're there pretending to help the monsters. As a GM, you would sort of construct everything using the letter of the day as inspiration and the number of the day, and using the various tables of monsters and neighbors and clues. So it's a relatively open system. I don't know if you call it a system or an adventure or what have you, but it's relatively open. It's designed, I think, to be sort of improvised on the fly, though maybe you would roll the letter and number of the day before any of your players show up and plan around that. I think that's up to you, whether you try to improv everything as you go, or you roll the letter and number of the day before the session starts so you can prepare. But it's got a lot of Sesame Street theming, it's got some horror elements in there, it's got some parody and joke elements in there. If you were ever looking to create an episodic campaign, or, battle Elmo as an extra-dimensional monster, then I think this is definitely the game for you. Another one of our more experimental campaign frameworks is a game called Meatframes, which is, as it says, a game about operating a human body. You can see a sort of example of the thing that you might be playing as in part, though I don't really, reading the materials, this isn't really what came to mind for me. I was thinking for something at least a little more high-tech in sort of my imagining of things. But basically, the game is a game where every player creates 2 characters. First, their character, which is the robot they control, which will be accessing and using its meat frame to move around. Completely lost my train of thought. Oh yeah. And the other one you will be creating is a human character, a normal person, which is the sort of meat frame, I believe, that your character will be operating at times. And then, often at the end of the session, or in the next session, players will actually switch the meat frames and be using their robot, which is their player character, to control a different captive human. Not necessarily captive, per se, but definitely enslaved. Now, the sort of game isn't really focused on making this make sense or specifying why exactly these sort of exoskeleton like robots feel the need to, what's the word? Navigate the world using a human. It's not even something that they need to do in order to move around. It's more really of like a sort of odd cultural thing that is left up to your imagination. If you wanted to make it more realistic, quote unquote realistic, I suppose you could make it so the robots are like instead computer chips that can override a human's brain, and then uh, that's a more efficient way for them to move around, and that's why they do it by using a human body in their brain to feel things and have sensations and stuff like that. But that would be, essentially a very different version of the game. As written, you are a robot that exists outside and visibly on the surface of a human. It's actually taboo to be inside of a human and it not be obvious that it is a machine controlling them, and sort of just externally operates their movements and such. What is meatframes content running? The words of it, animal etiquette. Maybe that's actually what the humans are called, and the meatframes are the robot. I can't quite remember the terminology. It's a role playing game in which young robots train to operate human bodies for use in responding to an impending threat. Okay, so there's some kind of impending threat that is part of why they need the human bodies. Again, I don't think it's really specified, it's left up to the table, or maybe supposed to specifically be a mystery, but. You play as robots. Okay, the humans are known as meatframes. Yeah, and it's a huge faux pas for robots to fight without using meat frames to do it. And the meat frames of humans are aware and sentient the entire time. Yeah, there is no game master. I might have accidentally said game master earlier, but it's a GM list, and there's definitely some content warnings because there's body horror elements, and just the concept in general of operating enslaved humans is obviously not going to be everyone's thing. Yes, because of the history and traditions of Frame, the planet, meat frames may be operated by animals, which I believe are the robots, as needed. And so it's not really, they don't really say specifically why all of this is, and I think that is a good and important detail. Having it sort of be open ended in the player's mind, I think, really affects the tone of play, and also any explanation they explicitly came up with would probably be seen as wrong by some people for just an out there concept or kind of reductive. Yep, the operation can cause damage. So I'm skipping a lot of this. And animals create a. The players create one animal and one meat frame. And the player who was most recently controlled by a robot or artificial intelligence starts with the sort of starting move. Yeah, and then once you've gone around the table, you can decide to whether you want to go around again or run one final program and then end it. It's always important to keep in mind whether what your meat frame feels versus what the animal you're actually controlling feels. Yeah, there's some immediate goals, some more long term goals, There's 3 rules, and like I said before, this is explained in more depth later, and it's that, the animal always has to be external and can't appear to be just a free walking meat frame. And there's positive and negative tags, which I think affect rules or something. As creating the meat frame with a human is called breeding, which is funny. Tokens are sort of just a currency to do various things with. These are your relationships to various meat frames and or other robots or animals. Yeah, and then saves is the basic rolling mechanic. I'm not really gonna be paying too much attention to that here because I really don't think that's the highlight of the system or the focus. Yeah, more details about the process of attaching to a human and what it might do to that human and the effects it might have visually. And then character creation focus on relationships a lot. There's no explicit mechanical effects to relationships. It's just a way to track how how much you've interacted with another robot or human you've operated before, and for you to keep that in mind as it affects how you roleplay with them. There are factions, and that also helps, I believe, your program or something. No, it gives you an additional mechanic for how to get tokens. Yeah, so you can be a meat frame monogamous, and you get tokens more when you operate the same frame. Now the programs, these are sort of like moves, but not really, because, you get a rotation around the table, and you always start with a specific one, so there's sort of more like scenes than moves, but you could probably consider them moves if you wanted. Okay, run at the beginning of each session, an opportunity to introduce animals and meat frames to the table. I think that's the only program we're really going to look at, maybe one additional one. Okay. Starting with the animal who ran this program, go around the table to the left. Each animal performs one of the steps below. Introduce the animal, introduce the meat frame. By the way, every meat frame's pronoun is it. They don't get real pronouns. Then you record the pairing, or you do one of these actions, I guess, not all of them. And you can alternatively to the other options describe. Okay, no, you perform each of the steps below. I misremembered that. You just introduce your animal, you introduce your meat frame, you record the pairing, and you describe the process of meeting up. So whoever the first player is sort of gets their turn taken up by introductions, I suppose. And then you actually start to sort of combine, so to speak. If they're cooperative, they can be cooperative or difficult initially. The human that you are starting to control. And if it becomes less cooperative, you actually harm it in some way. If you roll exactly the same, you get a token. And your meat frame has the option to do something during that process. So you control both the robot that is your consistent player character and the meat frame, which is your secondary in a sense. And all the players alternate meat frames potentially. So, you're the only one that controls your meat frame during that session, but during another session, a different player may control that meat frame. And they can't really move around freely, but they can talk and stuff. And each animal who participated in the program can take a positive or negative relationship with another robot. Yeah, and if you're the monogamist, you get an extra token for operating the same one. Yeah, so like most of the programs, everybody does something. Like this one, everyone goes on a trip, goes on patrol. It doesn't necessarily seem like there's much interactions with the meat frames during this program. It varies from program to program whether that's there. But like I said, these are a lot more, in a sense, you could maybe consider these moves, but they are a lot more complicated than moves. They're more like full scenes that you can choose from. This one is kind of a fight one, and I believe it wouldn't be all the meat frames, but the players rather participating. Yeah, you would challenge another animal to a confrontation. Uh, to a confrontation. And they can spend a token to refuse the challenge. In subroutines, conflict subroutines, there's at least one where you can talk to your meat frame. In this one, you can commune with your meat frame alone. And I believe there are sort of downsides to this. It's potentially frowned on. Yeah, so you can talk to your meat frame during this program. And I don't know if every player is doing this, so it's just the one that picked the program. So you would ask the meat frame one of the questions, and the last player to operate this meat frame instead of you answers for it. You choose another player to answer for the meat frame in this instance. So unlike the suiting up or whatever it is in the startup program, you're not actually controlling the meat frame in this, so I suppose it's generally variable who controls the meat frame. And there's space on the character sheet for you to write down, whoever initially makes the meat frame, to write down some of its personality, if I remember. So there are sort of mechanisms to track personality for the same meat frame over time. And this sort of helps, players sort of think about the relationship between the, people that are controlled by these robots and the robots and the ethics of it all. And a relatively key feature of this, which I haven't mentioned yet, you have been taught that meat frames don't feel pain and that they don't have higher computational functions. So at least the first one you can probably establish is false through opening the port or communicating with your meat frame. So there's also some sort of intrigue there where things you're being told aren't necessarily true. But I think that sort of goes over the gist of it. This is not like a fully fleshed out system. It's more of a mini campaign thing. I believe the creator said they might make a like truly comprehensive version of it later, but you see references to the impending threat throughout here. That has no specific answer to what it is in this or suggestions for it, and there's no actual mechanics or anything like that for confronting it. It's sort of just, a slice of life about a truly horrifying situation where every day your robot character attaches itself to a enslaved human, and then you go around the table running different scenarios with everybody's robot and their human and their relationships to everyone. And that's sort of the gist of the game. Like I said, it's pretty experimental in a certain sense. A lot of RPGs say there's no winning or losing, but this one specifically, it seems there's very much no winning or losing. And it's all just about exploring relationships and the emotions and themes of a world where robots control people, and not in a sort of metaphorical sense, but directly pilot their bodies. Looking at this one, I'm not entirely sure whether it's just supposed to be read left to right, top to bottom or not, but definitely seems like you can read it that way, so that's what I'll go for. It's called Your Magic GPA Isn't Gonna Save Itself, and it's a one-session RPG about stealing an exam to, not fail the course, basically. You've got your character sheet, you get a basic magic affinity, and you can draw one less card doing that. Choose a magic weakness, then set your mana. You roll 6d6 plus 10, or you can roll 1d6 and multiply by 6 and add 10 if you're feeling lazy or wild, because that's going to be a more swingy result, likely. When you're rolling multiple d6, the array is going to be more normalized, because, you would have to roll 6 times to get a wild number on this one, whereas with this method, if you just roll 6 once, you've already got the max amount. So this one's, like they say, a little more wild if you do it just by 1d6 and multiply it. Then you set your hit points. And what's really interesting about this game is the way casting spells works. We'll probably get into that in a second, though. Just to give you a bit of a primer, though, your mana isn't actually something you spend per se. It's more an upper limit that you add to, and then once you go over it, something happens. But I'll show that off a bit when we actually get into it. To perform any kind of action that isn't magic, but is relatively complex. Say what you want to do, and the GM will say if there's a roll and what the DC is. And you just roll a d6. Yeah, there's no critical success here. Alright. Next up, there's the sort of more innovative thing about this system, which is the magic actions. For any action that devolves into the arcane, you'll have to use cards. Each spell has a number of cards. If you want to cast it, you draw that many, and then you keep them faced up in front of you. The numbers on the cards indicate the amount of mana you spent to cast the spell. If you spent your total mana or more, you can't cast spells until you get rid of some cards and have mana again. When the deck runs out, shuffle all discarded cards to form a new deck. So to explain that in slightly simpler terms, say I've got 10 mana. I've got a spell that says 2 cards. I cast the spell, then draw 2 cards. It's a 5 and a 4, it's a 9. I've used 9 out of my 10 mana. I can still cast spells. Say I cast another spell, it says 3 cards, I draw 3 cards. It's a 5, a 5, and a 5. That means I get to 15. Now I've used 24 out of my 10 mana. The spell still resolves, but I can no longer cast spells until I find a way to reduce the mana. Yeah, like, this explains the basic example, but it doesn't really explain what happens when you go over. The rules do, but there's no example for going over, so I just provided one. The spell still resolves. I've confirmed it with the creator, and that is what the text seems to imply. I just wanted to double check. It's just that you can't cast any more once you go over. And those cards just stay in front of you, because you've still spent that amount of mana, until you find a way to change that. And that brings us to the next subject, getting mana back. You can spend HP to remove 2 cards, or 3 to remove all. Yeah, there are some potions that exist that remove mana, and there's one spell at least that can change your mana around a bit. If you draw a joker, you can put the other cards you drew for this spell back into the pile. This spell is free. You can return any other card of your own to the pile. Yeah, and I think any other is one card of your own. But I can't say basically you draw a Joker, you get rid of the other cards you drew through the spell, and you can get rid of one card that you had already drawn. So not only does it make the current spell free, it gives you back some of your mana by getting rid of an old card too, basically. At the game, you're in a magic school, but you flunked the last exam. And you're just trying to retrieve your test. There's the GM and the players. And let's see, damage. If you take any sort of damage, you'll get 1 HP. A particularly strong one could lead to more, and you pass out if you go down to 0. If you're playing with other people, you can just go back to 1, though, by drawing a card. Just to, sort of not leave a player out entirely, I believe, though. I guess the only lose condition is getting caught then. If any of the teachers recognize you doing something illegal, or students give you away to the authorities, you will lose the game. Or you can lose by having everyone pass out. Yeah, and you win if you change your grade. So that's the gist of the system. I think it's a very interesting one, specifically. Yeah, you could also, if everybody in your group passes out, and they say this, but I wasn't sure how to say it at first, if everyone in your group passes out and is at 1 HP, then it's harder for you guys to regain mana, and you get a card for passing out as well. So if you all get to that state and can no longer cast mana, though technically there might still be ways for you to get some mana back, at that point the game ends. So that's sort of an overview of the system rules. Some very basic check stuff, but the main focus is you have a set mana number, and every time you cast a spell, you draw cards to see how much you use. Once you go over, you have to decrease that amount by discarding cards to be able to cast again. I think that's sort of a very elegant way to do a mana system while being able to remember things easily, just by using cards to help you remember. And also determining how you can recover mana by set amounts by discarding those cards and having interesting mechanics with jokers. So I really like the magic mechanics of this game. And there is actually a spell list. Let me see if I can find that. There we go. There's a spell list. The basic spell is Mana Flux. You can remove one of your active cards and draw 2 more by and that costs nothing. So it's kind of like a D&D cantrip, so to speak. I have checked, it says remove any of your active cards, which depending on the language you might assume, means all of them, which would kind of make no sense, potentially, but it is supposed to be any one, specifically, of your active cards, and return drawing 2. Or I'm just missing it somewhere, but to quickly go over some of the other spells, yeah, there's schools of magic, effectively, because you have your specialty and your weakness. And you can do a big push, you can lock objects in place, you can levitate things, you can communicate telepathically, you can link yourself with a beast. So a lot of interesting spells. You can instantly freeze things. And there's some additional things that affect your card rate. Yeah, but they're all kind of a big risk, because you can get rid of a high card for an ace, if we say that counts for 1, say. But you also get an additional random card in the process, so this is a big risk, and it also, quote-unquote, well, not quote-unquote, but potentially damages another player's mana pool. You can get 3 cards basically in order to in order to help another player remove a card, but that's a huge cost. I guess you would only do that if one player's in a massively critical situation for some reason and they need to do a spell quick, and you could just steal it from them. Connection, 3 cards. Once you've drawn the necessary cards to cast this spell, you can remove 3 or more of your cards if they all have the same number face. Yeah, so these I feel like are kind of chancy, maybe need to be improved slightly, except that last one, but they are very interesting. And then you've got the more standard spells where you can achieve a lot of interesting effects. Finally, this also has a whole map. And there might also actually be a download for GM information that tells you some things. I can't remember, but effectively you've got your basic checks, you've got your sort of interesting card-based magic casting system about drawing cards to fill up your magic pool and then finding ways to discard them when it fills up too high and you can't cast anymore. And then you've got a whole spell list and some GM info and a map and stuff, so it's not obviously hugely developed in the art department, but it's a very creative and I think well-established system for you to run a fun card-based magic RPG about stealing tests from the magic school you're enrolled in. Alright, so this is 00. I think we're going to speed through this one a little bit, because a lot of the information here is explaining the rules of blackjack or going into examples of rules that are established, and I think that's actually a highlight for it, both that it uses blackjack mechanics, because I've certainly seen it done other places as well, but I think that's a mechanic that people enjoy quite a lot when it's put into RPGs, and also because I think it's very significant that they explain everything, I'm going to say exhaustively, but not in a way that is exhausting, just in a way that really covers everything in kind of a quick and light way. So basically, for the game, characters are secret agents. They should always succeed overall, and this is kind of the segment for author intent of the tone of the game and such. It's not necessarily rules, but basically, players are secret agents. They shouldn't have to ever do a check to do anything basic, and they should always succeed in the end. It's just sort of the story of the path on how they get there. But in terms of actual rules, you've got your blackjack, just played like normal blackjack. The GM won't go above 17, and like a dealer will in various versions of blackjack games, they won't try to get above 17. And what's interesting about this is that jokers are included, and they can have any value from 1 to 11. So as well as affecting the players and giving them a huge boost, because, having a card that always can be as high as you want but never goes over is really just great for blackjack. It also affects the GM, but if it would put someone over 17 at any point, they can't decide that or would put the GM over 17 at any point. They can't decide to make it a lower value for the Joker to try and keep drawing. Then the other two sort of wrinkles in the check mechanic, well, actually kind of 3, because blackjack, a face card and an ace or a 10 and an ace, is a critical success. It's a failure if the GM gets it, and if both the player and GM get it, it's a critical success at a cost. Players get, roughly 3 gadgets that they can just write down what it is on their character sheet in character creation, and they can spend that gadget to turn something into a critical success before the check is fully resolved. Specialties are kind of like skills. And a PC can write down whatever they want for those, and then the GM has to agree they apply to a specific situation. And if you declare that you're using a specialty before a check and the GM agrees that it applies, you can just discard a card, basically. One of the two initial cards you're dealt for the blackjack game. Then, villains, who are sort of like going to be the main bad guys, have the villain specialty, which just applies to every check they make, and can potentially have unlimited gadgets. Hench people are just kind of like player characters, but they've got one specialty and one gadget. And then goons, you just always beat automatically. So those are kind of the highlights of 00. Blackjack rules with the sort of addition of Joker being a wild card and you getting to automatically blackjack if you spend a gadget and discard a card if you have a specialty that applies, as well as sort of being a story-focused game rather than questioning whether the player characters will succeed or fail, and it explains the rules of blackjack very well. It doesn't tell you to just do blackjack, it doesn't do an efficient summary, it really tells you how to play pretty much, and has plenty of examples for all the other mechanics, so it's a fun blackjack rules light system for spies that really goes over the explanations of everything really well. Next, we're looking at Out to Lunch, which I think is sort of interesting in that it's not something I've really seen before. It's not really a one-shot necessarily, it's not really a plan of how to run a specific session necessarily. It's like a framework and brainstorming storming tool to help you develop a specific sort of kind of session in your own campaign. The basic idea is that the players end up in a fun, enticing, or interesting location. They try to leave, but they can't. In order to leave, they have to try and get this paperwork, and then a bunch of NPCs give them the runaround. They find out what's really going on in some way, and then they confront the mastermind behind everything. So you've got sections like this, where the PDF sort of tells you what you need to do to establish certain things that are necessary to run the session. And then it gives you some specific options, that you can pick from if you don't want to create your own, like a fungal overmind, and that's sort of the one the example of play uses, just a lonely noble, some sort of extortion effort. Then there's the bait, and you gotta plan out what the thing is that the players are going to visit. It has a lot of tips and a lot of the things that you really need. It makes sure you establish that your location needs to have something that prevents the players from just finding a way to leave without really engaging in the runaround or confronting the mastermind, so to speak. And obviously that can be hard to do in a truly sandbox-style campaign where players are free to do whatever, because, a creative player can always find a way out of something if you're not specifically going to create roadblocks in real time, which is something you wouldn't necessarily do if it was really freeform. Ones that weren't consequences of the player's actions anyway. So there's a little bit of maybe railroading, if you really want to call it that, here probably. But, the whole point is that you can free to modify, tweak, or reinterpret anything however you want. So if your players do find a clever way to get out of the location, despite whatever roadblocks you put up, when you're running this, and if you're okay with it, you could just choose to let them get out that way, even though that kind of cuts the mystery and the adventure short. Yeah, so here's some of the bait locations. Casino that doesn't cost any money but lets you keep your winnings, which of course doesn't really matter if you can't leave. never-ending athletic tournament, enormous infinite party boat, huge library, all this sort of things. And then there's a lot of, other questions, just how big is it? Just really tools to help you establish the setting. Then you got to set up the bureaucracy. And there's an outlook to lunch sign at a desk. Say, there are specific plausible reasons why, a specific person needs to take care of the issue, to let them leave. And they've got a lot of ideas for how to sort of give your players the runaround. Slightly wrong form. Signature is invalid because the person who signed it was suddenly just fired off screen. Stamp off center. So many different things you could do that are sort of just bureaucratic nightmares that you can put your players through for fun. And you got to plan for. They give you a bunch of other ideas to plan for too. It's a very nice sort of guide to help you come up with the idea for this session. Yep, and here are the ways you can sort of give them clues. And these clues, they say they're clues, but they're really, I'd say more obvious than I would consider most clues. It's kind of just, you don't really want players to have to figure out the bureaucracy or go over it through hours or be particularly careful. It's just sort of something for them to slowly realize that, they're in some kind of huge fake trap and sort of get playfully frustrated a bit, and then you give them the relatively obvious clue of where to go next. That's not really necessary in a lot of puzzles, I feel like, but in one like this that is sort of designed to be annoying, it's kind of good to have a, very obvious way forward. Right, and then there's the final confrontation. And there are different ways that the players can sort of get out of everything other than just beating the mastermind, though honestly most parties are probably going to go with that, unless you make it a truly unbeatable enemy somehow. Like, allows players to leave if they agree to a contract. Actually just a really big misunderstanding. Something valuable in exchange, invites them to conspire. A bunch of different alternate ways out other than just thwarting the mastermind. And here's the complete playthrough example, which I think is very helpful for figuring out how they all want everything to come together. Many decks, and each step has multiple music runes. Guests are requested to stay on the designated music decks. Yeah, to avoid anyone falling overboard. And there are no windows or balconies. And there's sort of just a huge trapdoor that blocks the way, so as a place that's hard to get out of. Like I said, you might have to do some railroading if players are just like, I'm just going to knock a wall down or something. And then the bureaucracy. First they get a simple answer and are sent to a certain place. And so they show up there, but the person who's supposed to be there is out to lunch. So then they wait for a while, they wait for longer. This is a example that I feel like isn't how it would play out for many parties, but yep. And then they go to try and find another member of the crew to find the right person. And then they're thrown through another bureaucratic hoop that they have to jump through in order to get to the step they thought they were already at. So this is just sort of a nice example of how you can give them the runaround. Then, when they're pretty sure that there's something fishy going on, you lay the clue out in front of them. Yeah, in this case, they follow that path, and it leads to all the chefs in the kitchen are cooking some sort of fungal meat batter for all of the players and customers. Yeah, they go through the kitchen further. Like I said, they don't really have to go through a huge clue hunting to find where the ultimate enemy is. They just sort of follow the first clue, and then just moving forward, they get to the place they need to go pretty easily. And they are in confrontation, and they offer an alternate way out. And the alternate way out in this case is one leaving and then bringing back replacements for the rest of the players. In this case, the players do decide to fight back, it looks like. And there's a final plot hit at the end where, one of the players who ate the fungal food, may have been infected by it. And so that sort of gives you a jumping off point for additional sessions. So I think this is a really comprehensive, but very free-form at the same time, guidebook and sort of brainstorming guide for you to make a bureaucratic hellscape to put your players through for a session, which I think is a very fun concept and a way of making content for RPGs that I haven't really seen before. Next up, we have We Are the Land. For over a millennia, you and your coven of immortal guardians have watched over this site of power. This point of magical energy must be protected, but now a group of mortals have dared to disturb this sacred location, and must be taught the error of their ways. Your goal is simple. The interlopers must be driven away, lest they damage or destroy your home. Whether you gruesomely murder and consume them, bewitch and enslave them, or scare the sanity from them, the choice is yours. So this is a game where you play as a group of sort of monsters or protective spiritual beings guarding a font of power, as, that introduction established. Each guardian has 4 attributes, which are sort of like stats. And then there are a couple options for the form you take, and that gives you various sets of stats. You get specific powers. And like anything with a roll for a set of options in character creations, it says to roll, but I'm pretty sure you can just pick these yourself if you prefer. Now, a lot of fun options for this. Hybrid creatures, living elements, pixies or gnomes, being of pure energy or swarm, shapeshift, life drain, poison, deal maker, weather manipulation. Just a lot of the options for this are very fun and give you a lot of coverage. Right? And you also get a selection of possible weaknesses. Some of them are more cliche, being bound, silver, light fire, a great hunger, being always truthful, stupid, which in itself I think is sort of a tradition as well, but, perhaps not always said as directly as that. Then you determine what the site of power is. You roll a d6 to see who's disturbing it, and you basically play from there. When the guardian attempts an action and the outcome is in doubt, it's just d6 plus attribute. If it's 5 or higher, you succeed. If it's below 5, you increase peril if you fail, and then roll another d6 if the result is below the current peril. Something bad happens. Can be many forms, from the victims discovering a guardian's weakness to successfully trapping one of the guardians or inflicting a mortal wound on them. The guardians can communicate telepathically with each other and are assumed to be able to speak. However, they might struggle to talk. It's fairly fun for a one-page thing. What I like about it mostly is all the different options. I think they're well thought out. I think the stats all fit them. Like, I like the abilities, I like the weaknesses. I like the different forms that the creature can take. Now, and something that is less my thing, but I could see how someone would consider it an asset, is that it's very open-ended what exactly this is as a game. Like, it tells you how to do checks, it tells you the goal and stuff, but whether you're supposed to play this, as a solo game where you just roll to see what happens, whether it is supposed to be a group of players controlling various guardians and a GM controlling the interlopers, or just a GM controlling the interlopers and then players, one player controlling the guardians. It's fairly open-ended, but there are a lot of fun ideas. There's some nice, cute, kind of creepy art. It's definitely worth checking out if you are willing to take a game and sort of build out from it, or if you're looking for inspiration for one of your projects. Alright, about now we are getting into the rolling skill segment of mini campaigns and one-shots. They're not necessarily different structurally from your typical mini campaign or one-shot, though this game kind of is. It's not really a typical adventure or event, it's kind of more a party game. But why I really have these sort of separate is they involve rolling dice, and the success condition is not just how high the number you roll is. For this one, 2 players roll after a countdown and see who can roll faster, sort of. It's determined by which die stops first, not who starts faster to an extent, but, you simulate a quick draw with dice, and for this one, you flick dice into a target zone, and then sort of build up a tower of dice that you might accidentally knock over, and that will cause disaster. So this subcategory is really marked separately to sort of demonstrate some of the different ways rolling can be used instead of just your traditional dice rolls. And they both happen to be mini campaign or one-shots, so I'd put this subcategory here for them. Next up, we have This Town Ain't Big Enough, which is actually the game I submitted to the bundle. I used open clip art for all of the art in it for now. I think that works pretty decently in a lot of places, but here you can definitely see where I sort of just slapped one image on top of the other. Now, I think I'll just start with what I'll actually start with is, I don't know if this is one of the highlights, but it is something that I thought was kind of fun that I tried. On the back cover of the booklet version, the right-hand side of the main cover, if you're looking at it as we are, is just a PDF that you read from top to bottom as usual. Because there's also a booklet version for you to print and fold up and everything. We have this text here, and this is actually a 24-word version of the main mechanic of the game. It's a little hard to understand on its own, but opposing gunslingers, countdown, roll. Dice land before a line, roll past another, one stops, t'other's shot. Too soon, ref shoots, missed a line, target's fine. So that might be a bit hard to understand, but basically, you're playing opposing gunslingers. The referee counts down, and then the players roll. The dice have to land before one line and roll past another to make sure they go a set distance. The first die to stop corresponds to the first character to fire, and if they roll too soon before the countdown stops, they are just shot and killed by the ref before they can fire. If they miss one of the lines, they miss the shot. So basically, 2 players roll dice, whoever stops first shoots first. So basically, 2 players roll dice after a third counts down. They have to roll a set distance, and they have to roll after, not before the countdown. But as long as you do that, whoever die stops first, which favors the player that managed to roll quicker, or in other words, shoot quicker after the quick draw, but also has a luck element. Whichever die stops first is the player that shoots first, and in the 24-word version, they just kill their opponent outright. Now this is effectively the same RPG, but much more in depth, and it fits on one page. I think we'll start with the summary of the expanded mechanic. Pick one of the 2 players not dueling to be the ref, then set up 1 or 2 markers, placed objects or lines drawn on paper, on the table. The ref counts down 3, 2, 1, draw, after which players roll d12s past the marker. Whoever stops first shoots first. Results depend on how well and quick players roll, as well as the number that comes up. Missing, killing, being shot by the ref, being wounded, and having your aim thrown off are all possible. So here's sort of the step-by-step process of playing and interpreting results. A player that is rolled early is killed. A player that rolls early is killed, and killed players can't hit. A roll hits when it stops before the line and stops after. The player to hit kills only if their roll is higher, and that's an additional element that's not in the 24-word version. If the other also hits, it cannot kill, and that's because being wounded by that shot throws off their aim when they return fire. If both live, the duel repeats, but players hit again are killed, and that's because they were wounded. The winner gets 3 glory. Now also, there's everything leading up to this, where players create characters with 2 motivations. They need to want to settle conflicts with a duel and have a reason they'll get into a conflict with anyone. And those are the only 2 real details you need for character creation, but you can actually get a lot out of that. I'll show you how in a minute. The 2 players that, the group decides are going to duel first, pick any kind of setting, a saloon or something, and then role play the characters meeting and getting into a fight. After that, one of them challenges them to the duel. They do the duel, which we've already gone over. And then after a player loses, all the other players, and in the current version, they as well, decide what one of 3 hats that they are given based on the role that they led. And then all of the players, as well as getting glory from winning a duel, get glory from, what story the other players tell about them. And the player with the most glory in the end of the game, because this repeats until everyone's original character is dead basically, gets to tell the story of the event as a whole and everything that went down. And they can change details, say their character survived when they actually died, or when before it looked like they had died. Basically, the full story is decided by the victor. So, having gone over that, and how all of it, sort of fits on one page, I think I'm kind of doing a terrible job of explaining everything, but I kind of just want to show off some of the ideas I was putting into it more than how it literally works in practice. You can sort of look at that in a bit clearer detail if you download the game yourself. But anyway, all of this explains character creation, explains, how you can get into duels, explains how you might want to discuss sort of the tone of the setting first, tells you about the reasons you have to make for your character. Basically, all of the stuff that was sort of glossed over here, character creation, conflict, that gets its own dedicated page in the real full version of the game. Here is the character creation table, which you don't have to use if you want to come up with your own reasons. But if you do, you get a lot of options, like a character that duels because, they're worried someone's going to shoot them, but if they just shot them in cold blood, they would be in trouble. So who challenges people to duels to basically take care of their perceived enemies while at the same time making it all relatively legal. For a reason to get into conflict with anyone. You might just have thin skin. There's a certain thing that sets you off if someone says it. And when we go into detail here, because, like the first section, which was sort of character creation and stuff, where we have a full page for the details, we have a full page for the details of the conflict. And even if a character, say, hates being called short, even if they're not directly insulted, they might mishear a word or be set off by a phrase like short-tempered. So that gives players a lot of freedom to sort of figure out what might set their character off without necessarily, following the most obvious version of how these would apply. Was the full version of a duel, which might be the easiest one to understand, but is kind of less good as just a reference. 2 markers are placed a foot apart or lines drawn on paper. 2 players stand or sit next to each other. A third player, the ref, counts down from 3, 3, 2, 1, draw. Both players roll a d12 as quick as they can after the countdown, from one line to another. If a player draws before the countdown finishes, they're instantly shot by the ref. If a player's die stops first, that means they shoot first. If their roll starts after or stops before a marker, they miss. Otherwise, they hit the opponent, killing on a higher roll, wounding on a lower, or tie. The opponent fires back if alive. If they were hit, aim is thrown off, and they wound even on a high roll. Missing works as normal. If both players are alive, repeat from step 3, but wounded characters die even if their opponent rolls low. And the winner gets 3 glory if time and number both tie. There's also a lot of optional rules. There's some accessibility options where you use a slope instead of directly rolling, because, controlling the force of a roll, doing it at a certain time, keeping that all together can be a bit more difficult than just, dropping a die on a slope on a countdown, and where you drop that die will still affect how far and fast it travels, so there's still some strategy there. You can just make things a lot more simpler, or just ignore the wound part to be a little more simpler. You can mess with different settings. So basically, it's a game where players quickly create sort of Western gunslinger characters, roleplay a fight, duel, which is based on how quickly a player rolls and how fast the die stops. And then players tell the story of what happened, and whoever gets the most glory in the end tells the final story. So that's sort of the gist of the game. Next up, we have critical triggers, which is 2 pages, but they fit a lot of mechanics in there. The mechanics are really the star of this one. You start with 10d6. And then each player has a sort of zone that they're trying to flick dice into. Yeah, during a check, you flick one die, and then you can decide to stop or keep going. And you can, you can shoot up to all 10 die, which are, your mag. And with each additional die, you have to describe what you do more, basically, just more, and with more risks involved. You only count the highest result. 6 is a total success. 4 or 5 is a partial, and then 1, 2, or 3 is just a failure. With every one that you roll straight a 1 on, whether it's inside the hit zone or not, you add it to your tower of chance in the middle of your hit zone. And if that tower collapses, there are consequences to that. Yeah, so basically rolls don't count if they don't land in the hit zone, except if they're a 1, in which case they do add to the tower. You have a progress track, and that gets you new skills or +1 die to your mag and stuff. If you successfully shoot 2 or more 6s, you can remove 1 from the top of your tower and return it to your mag. Now here's sort of the critical thing. When that tower falls, and there's other ways that it can trigger. If your mag goes down to 0, it is also considered a fall. The character is out for the scene. After the scene, they can receive help from other characters. They return to the game. They lose 2 mag max dice, and their mag is refilled. And if the mag max reaches 0, the character dies or retires forever. Yeah, there's a flashback mechanic in this, which you've probably seen before, in certain games where instead of actually having characters prep for scenes, in scenes every character has the option of explaining how something that they had prepared in the past is useful to them now, and sort of gives you a little scene of what that was like. Yeah, and you add the cost of that in this game is adding to your Tower of Chance. You can get 1 die back from the tower when you sort of let your character's weakness get the better of you. Yeah, and you can also sort of act like a more fleshed out character at rest scenes, and then you retrieve 1 die that way. Yeah, you get some bonuses to succeeding, and then there are advancements. So basically, anytime there's a check, you flick die toward a target zone. You can flick as many as you want, but they subtract from your mag. Once you have, once you're finished with that, once you're satisfied, whatever the highest die in there determines the result. 6 is total success, 4 to 5 is partial, 1, 2, 3 is failure. Just double checking something. Yeah, so I don't know if it specifies, you're gonna have to look through yourself to be sure, but it looks like, or I would guess, you retrieve dice after the check is finished that don't get added to the Tower of Chance. However, every one that lands a 1 adds to the Tower of Chance. And then if the Tower of Chance gets knocked over, you get some big disadvantages. Your max mag is cut down. You're removed from the scene for a bit, though you can be revived. And your mag refills completely from all the stuff that was in the tower. You can flash back at the cost of adding stuff to the tower. You can remove stuff from the tower by following your weakness, or by really showing off a secret side to your character in downtime. and then after each mission, you start to sort of advance and stuff. So it's a very interesting system around a die, hitting them into a zone, adding to a tower, trying not to knock that tower over, ways to get dice back from it, and what happens if you do knock it over, which sort of resets everything, but at a cost. So it's a very interesting system in that sense. And then you've got a lot of tables for character creation and for setting creation, which I won't really get into now, but something for you to look forward to if you do check this out, which, like usual, I recommend. Alright, and on the last segment of the rolling skills section, we have these structured slash minimal prep necessary one-shots. Now these might be called adventures or modules, depending on what kind of game you're playing, but basically, these are your standard, pre-made campaigns for people to run. This one is sort of just a draft of this one, but these are your pre-made campaigns, basically, though some of them they're really more one-shots than full campaigns. Here we're looking at our first sort of fully set module, and then and it's Escape from the Goblin Horde for the bind system. I feel like this is one you really need to see for yourself, so I'm not going to go over it too much here. But they have some setting information, they have sort of the basic rules of the system that you'll need to know. They've got some of the overviews of the premise, of the history of the labyrinth. There's really a lot of stuff in here, so I definitely encourage you to check it out yourself. The campaign sort of starts with each PC having been captured, and they awaken in, in a cell. And they awaken in a cell, you give them a moment to get to know each other, you have options for if they try to wiggle free. And then there is Bellcut, who is a sort of NPC. And it is, he's managed to survive, but it is difficult to get him to join you. And there's, they're trying to get Bellcut to actively untie them, because I suppose he is not tied himself. The goblins arrive. You can fight still tied up, but there are major penalties. Here's the basic enemy that you face, I believe. Yeah, it introduces rules as you go on. So every once in a while it'll have rules that'll just show up when they become relevant. One of the things I like most about this module is I feel like it has a very extensive map that's quite clearly laid out. You don't get to see the full scope of it here, but yeah, there's information on all the various rooms, and there are a lot of different directions you can go in. So it's like a fully set up dungeon that doesn't necessarily that has multiple paths that players can go down. And there's events that can happen in each of the rooms. There's one with a captive dragon that can't fit through, a dragon in a lair at least that can't fit through to the treasure room, and the players can choose to help them or not. There are various rooms with various amounts of goblins. There's a slug hall, a grand library. There's really just a ton of stuff to explore in this dungeon, with a bunch of different enemy types, and any relevant rule is included. There's a mushroom room. I remember some interesting stuff happens in that, but I couldn't quite tell you what. Yeah, an ooze begins to stalk them. Yeah, sort of giving you a moment to re-go over everything that happened. Then appendix with some of the items with riddles. I believe there's like an item or something that has riddles to it that you can do. I can't quite remember what the riddles are. Or probably search to go back to that. And you've got this. This is the full map. It's not labeled with numbers here, but that's what the full scope of it looks like. NPC or enemy informations, character sheets. So it's really like anything you would want in order to run this. Scrolls and riddles litter the whittling warren. Everyone has their little bigotries, and gnomes are no exception. When the gnomes of this whittling warren make magical talismans, they generally put a riddle on the front where the axle will activate the talisman's ability. This serves two functions. You don't have to write the activation word on the scroll and risk it being picked up by a human. Yeah, and so they don't think that humans could figure out the riddle. Yeah, you can still write it directly on the scroll without it necessarily being accessible through that by having a riddle there, and that's why they did that. So that's kind of a fun little lore detail that ends up as a mechanic for the players. So overall, Escape from the Horde is a very in-depth dungeon where player characters are killed. Additional ones can appear in the cells. There's some riddles attached to magical objects that help you unlock and use them. There's slugs, there's fungus and ooze, there's dragons, and there are multiple paths that characters can proceed, like elevators, chimneys, stairs, all with rules on how to play the system sort of sprinkled throughout. So if you're interested in trying a new system with a very in-depth dungeon attached to it, with a decent amount of lore as well, and some riddles, and just a lot of cool goodies, this is definitely one to check out. I like the art of the dragon here. Just a quick side note, so I was actually more familiar with an older version of this, and I do think the layout is a little bit easier to parse. So I'm just going to go through this a bit. You've got the full map laid out with numbers, and the sort of transformation stuff I might have been alluding to that is not in the more modern versions, I think. Yeah, the gnomes opened a portal to the astral plane where the Nura seeped in. Once inside the warren, the Nura transformed gnomes into more Nura. So the Nura is sort of like goblins in this world, and there are other creatures that transformed into them, which I thought was pretty interesting, but may no longer be part of the module, so, oh well. Here we have Cult of the Cave Crickets, having a bit of trouble going through these more structured one-shots, or maybe two-shots, so I'll try to keep this brief. It's an adventure designed for 46 level 2 PCs. I believe there are multiple versions of this depending on which RPG system you're using. There's one for a specific system and one that's more agnostic, I think, but I can't quite remember the details. Yeah, this adventure includes a myriad of challenges intended to allow each class an opportunity to shine. Although any party composition can succeed, yes. The PCs are employed to find and rescue an expedition of researchers who mysteriously vanished while seeking a fallen star along the outskirts of the known world. There, the PCs will encounter sentient fungal monstrosities and the cult of cave crickets who worship them. Fighting into the depths of a nearby cave, the PCs rescue the expedition members while uncovering the ultimate goal of the cult, to open a portal to the fungal homeworld and usher in a new age of mycelium supremacy. And that kind of covers the gist of it. Here's some background. Here are the different acts. They first encounter the abandoned camp of the scientists or explorers. Then there are the caves within, and then even deeper caves. There are a bunch of different encounters and puzzles that you get through. There's mycelium that can tell truths and lies, which is kind of fun. There's like living fungal armor that can start to take control of PCs. There's a lot of really cool stuff in here, but that's, other than summarize the concept, it's hard to know where to start. Like, I can give you an overview of some of the art there. The Devouring Bog. It's an odd hissing sound. Yeah, and the bog will actively pull creatures that step into it. A semi-sentient fungoid has taken root and expanded to completely fill the space of this small chamber. You can destroy the bog. There's a secret door. There's just a lot of hidden details in a lot of the rooms. There's a curtain of fungus that actually talks to you and offers truths and lies. Yeah, the mycelium can actually attach to PCs and kind of stick on them, and then it becomes an active armor, which provides benefits but can hurt them over time. Yeah, it takes like a full week to really start doing damage, though, so it's not something that would happen mainly in the one shot itself. It's something that would happen if the campaign continued after. Yeah, truths, hidden dangers in the fungus, a final resting place of a shaman, and that helps you find like a dagger, which is actually a shard of the meteor that can be used in the final encounter to really help you out there. And you can actually see the portal through it or something. A lot of details in this module, like I said. Yeah, the tip of the fungal bridge is weak and brutal. There's prey in the deep caves. Yeah, meteor is a portal to another world. Yeah, the spider place is lousy with traps. Yeah, and here are some of the lies. They were just defending themselves from the people above. Eating a piece of the curtain grants eternal youth. The Krikari can walk through walls. The big enemy, effectively, of the campaign, you don't really fight him. You're supposed to protect the world from him really entering it, is a god and wishes to save the world from destruction. All that came into the caverns are dead or have escaped. There's nothing to find. And there's a monster in the caves that can only be defeated with the power of positive thought. I think that one's very funny, because that one's actually kind of believable, unlike a lot of the other ones. A list of the survivors and how some of them behave. The meteoric splinter blade, that's what I was talking about, that you can find on the dead shaman, if I remember right. Yeah, the sentient fungal spiders, these sound like they could definitely be a pain. Yeah, clever players may set the entire area on fire, but it would also kill the unconscious survivor. There's mushrooms, there's murals that sort of tell the story of how the crickets developed. Because the crickets were like corrupted. Were originally normal crickets, I think, that were corrupted by the fungus until they turned into something else. Yeah, if there's encounters for if people get lost, sort of random encounters or events. The Veil of Madness, which is kind of similar to the mycelium armor, but not quite the same. And then here we get to like the final encounter, which has a lot of factors, but this huge mushroom creature that is sort of slowly approaching the portal and trying to open it. And if you fully let him do it, then disaster strikes as more and more fungus can slip through. Yeah, that's sort of the gist of Cult of the Cave Crickets. I mean, it's a pretty interesting adventure. I definitely think you should check it out if you have a chance. Alright, on to our final mini-campaign, one-shot. We have the motherhood / Mother Day themed Dies Festi Matrum. Festival Days of the Mothers, and this is something that will eventually be a full campaign. Expanded upon a bit. Some details on the creator. But basically, the characters arrive or sort of ushered into another world on a boat. And there's this festival going on in this world where there are several trials of different petals and different aspects of motherhood that the players must overcome in order to gain entrance and audience at the court of the sort of goddess of the realm, and then decide to aid the person that brought them there or not. Yeah, so this is the person who they're sort of working for. The portal opens. They arrive in the docks. There's sort of a common or postal house there. There's a couple points of interest. The, additional DMPC, so to speak, is somewhat ill. It has some sort of tone notes for how everything should be. The far end of the wharf, there are gatekeepers, and each gate serves a magical crossing into its connected petal. A little bit of description on how things happen there, and then eventually the act ends, and we get into the trials, that are, I believe, are also correlated to seasons. This one is sort of something that starts out as a race, or an obstacle course on the water, but turns into a task to save one of sort of the leader of the area's drowning children that is being attacked by a drowned maiden. It's unclear what the drowned maiden truly represents, but they get a full shard for saving the person who is in danger, and an echo shard for not doing as well. Next is the sort of lavender petal. And now you're crossing into dusk, so I guess it's not entirely season-themed, so to speak. There's a guild, and eventually they get sort of to an inn, where the son of the inn transforms into a beast, and they have to sort of try and save him. There was a shower incident in here. There's a lot of references to movies throughout the work. This one is sort of a reference to Psycho, I believe. And so they have to save... you get a full shard if the person that Armin Beast was attacking is saved, and an echo shard if she dies. His survival does not affect the shard quality, but may affect, what his mother does afterwards, which makes sense. Finally, you go into the white jasmine petal, and this one is sort of themed around death and grief. There's sort of a crying spirit that no one can quite see that seems to be active, but the main challenge is actually cleaning a series of graves, and they can possibly encounter hostile ghosts, including a named one, throughout doing this. But on success, if they respectfully restore the graves, they gain the full shard, and if they only do some of it, they get the echo. Next, they get into the court with the, daughter of sort of the main goddess person named Mazikeen, and then the main one who is, let me see if I can find her name there. It should be in here somewhere. Yeah, Matri Lilitu, I believe. Now they arrive, there's some conversation. How the court reacts to them depends on, what kind of shards and what kind of successes they had. And the, NPC companion's wish is to seek effectively eternal youth. And the party can decide to support her in that or not. And if conflict does not have to occur, and there are different ways it can happen, there's also the possibility of an encounter. You'll actually be able to see the stat block for these a little later in. If either of the, godly people are resist to 0 hit points, they kind of just return in the seating above the court rather than truly dying, as you might expect of a godly figure. And in the best ending, the NPC gets exactly what she wants, and the party is rewarded generously. The hybrid is she regains beauty, but, she's still relatively sick and old. The curse ending, and where she gets the beauty, but she has to, be kind in order to maintain it. Looking at the, let's see if I can get to the actual stat blocks here. There's a lot of, powerful abilities that the sort of godly people have. A decent amount of hit points, maybe, though I always have trouble telling with 5e. Which, if I didn't mention it before, this is a 5e adventure, but anyway, it's a nice sort of celebration of mothers with lots of different emotional elements and guidance on tone, and some miraculous events happening. Plus, if, you see this and you like any of this, you might also like the full campaign version that's going to come out. But for what it is, I think this is very good. I like a lot of the little details. I like that it doesn't really, it's kind of a set of challenges. It doesn't really force you to go through anything other than that. And there are different ways the story can develop and stuff. So I think it's a very nice module celebrating some of the themes around mothers.